Alright, so it is finally done. The dual 240mm radiator custom loop in the Ncase M1, a build that I've been planning and teasing for quite a while. So two 240mm radiators in under a 15 litre case, I mean that's pretty impressive, and what that means in simple terms is that this should basically give you the best thermal and noise performance of any case or configuration under 15 liters in total volume. So in terms of ITX builds, I would definitely consider this a zero compromise performance build. I won't be personally using this build as my gaming and editing machine because I think it's going to be a little bit overkill for that, but we will see what the performance is going to be like. I definitely think a build this overkill is better suited to a 3D rendering machine or a video encoding machine, use cases and applications where you do need something compact, but also where time is money. And like many of the ITX custom loops that I've done, the hardest part was figuring out where and how to route the tubing, trying to choose the most efficient paths as I could, but from here on I do think it can be easily replicated. Firstly, let's take a look at all of the parts that went into this, starting with the two most important ones, the radiators and the fans. Now there are many ways to do an Ncase M1 custom loop. Many of the ones that I've seen so far just use a single 92mm or 240mm radiator, but I wanted to build a configuration with the best cooling performance possible in this case. This build is all about performance per liter. So for the side mounted radiator, we're using Ncase 240mm Coolstream PE radiator, that's 38mm thick, and I've paired that with two of Noctua's NFA 12x25 fans. This is most likely the biggest radiator in terms of thickness and height that you can install into the Ncase M1 and will be responsible for most of the loop's cooling. And for those who noticed, I did actually have to swap the power plug and nameplate position to get the radiator to fit. And for a build like this, I do think it's really important for the user to be able to access the complete interior of the case, access the motherboard, the memory if they want to upgrade that, the M.2 drive, and possibly the CPU even if they need to upgrade that down the road. So the side mounted radiator can actually be fully disconnected from the loop without any draining whatsoever. This is of course thanks to Watercooled's quick disconnect fittings, which will allow the fastest and most leak-free disconnection and reconnection of the loop in a matter of just seconds. You might still see a small drop on the very rare occasion during the unlocking of the fittings, so just make sure you have a paper towel or something close by. Another really cool thing that was kind of unintentional about these quick disconnect fittings is that you can completely connect the loop without that side mounted radiator, and you've kind of just got it cooled by that bottom mounted radiator. But if you don't need a ton of cooling and instead you want to use the side mounted bracket for say storage or something like that, or a pump even, this could be a totally viable option. The bottom mounted radiator is the XSPC TX240 ultra slim radiator, just measuring 22mm in thickness, and I've paired that with two of Noctua's slim NFA 12x15 Chromax fans. In total, you've got 50mm of clearance underneath the GPU water block. So with this setup, I've got around 13 mils of clearance for airflow. If you are having trouble sourcing the ultra slim TX240, which is pretty likely, you could probably go up to a 28mm thick radiator here, but any more than that and you'll have virtually zero clearance. The fittings and tubing will probably look very familiar at this point, as it's what I've used for pretty much all of my ITX custom loop builds. It's Ncase 16mm ZMT tubing paired with Watercooled's compression fittings. I've also added two additional ports to the loop for filling and draining. That's done with two of Ncase 3-way terminal splitters. Speaking of filling and draining the loop, that is something that did take quite a while for this build because the loop is fairly complex and we are working with two radiators. In other words, there are lots of little spots and places where air can get stuck and trapped. So I started filling the loop via those two ports that I added that pour directly into the radiators, and that was enough to get around 60% of the loop filled up. And then I filled the remainder up by disconnecting that side mounted radiator and filling that up to the brim separately, and then reconnecting that to the loop. Now the CPU pump block that I'm using is the SwiftTech Apogee Drive 2, which uses a relatively powerful DDC pump, which I've done testing on previously. A very impressive product from Swiftech, which is basically what makes this entire build possible. Many of you know that I'm a big fan of Watercooled's LT Solo pump block, which is basically the same thing but has a much weaker pump. And I have actually tested these two against each other back when I had the custom looped Ghost S1 build, and I found absolutely no difference in terms of thermal performance despite the Apogee Drive 2 having a significantly faster flow rate. For a dual radiator custom loop like this one though, I really don't feel confident in using the LT Solo because it is simply not designed to be used in applications like this, but I will be doing some pump speed benchmarks to see how much of a difference the flow rate makes to thermals with the Apogee Drive 2. One issue I did have with this pump block though is that you will need to use low profile memory, and even then one of the tubes is currently pushing on one of the memory sticks, which is not ideal at all. To fix this, I'd need to rotate that pump block fitting and then use a thinner radiator, but that's something that I don't really want to do for this build. For the CPU, I've gone with the 10-core 10900K and plugged that into the MSI Z490i unifier, and for the GPU, it's an RTX 2080 Ti. Of course, the thermal and noise performance numbers will hold the real answer as to whether this was worth it or not, but to have two 240mm radiators in under a 13-liter case, I feel like this really shows how space optimized the Ncase M1 actually is. So if you are interested in any of the parts that went into this build, I will leave them linked down below. Do subscribe if you haven't already for part 2. A huge thanks for watching, and I will see you all in the next one.